Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning for those of you where it's morning. Welcome to this week's edition of Global Lawyers of Canada Virtual Mentor Office Hours. And I'm looking forward to introducing our mentors today for you. Today we're joined by one of GLC's founders, an internationally trained lawyer, a tri-called lawyer, and now in-house associate at UBS in Singapore, Daniel Lowe. And we're also joined today by Jason Feng. Jason is an Australian construction lawyer at Pinsent Masons in Sydney, and he's also a content creator for helping young and junior lawyers build well-rounded and sustainable careers in the legal industry. Before I hand over to Jason and Daniel, just a reminder for everyone joining us live, we ask that everyone mutes their phones until after both of them have finished their presentation. But in the meantime, let's get that chat box fired up. Let's start throwing in your questions, your comments, introduce yourselves, and then later on we will have a question time and we'll be able to ask all those questions and we'll be able to unmute each of you at that point. So over to you guys.
Great, thanks for that, Siobhan. I guess just as a general background to this sort of stuff that we're trying to present on today. Broad topic is matter management and file management for junior lawyers. As part of that, we'll also talk a little bit about people management, but essentially these are the things, like Siobhan has kind of mentioned, these are soft skills for lawyers that are not really taught in law school, but they're super, super important to actual legal practice. Where law school has kind of taught about producing legal products, these soft skills are the other things that actually drive a successful legal business and a successful legal practice. So for the first few years of your career, you probably really need to actually hone in on these skills, consciously think about the best ways to actually manage matters. Sorry.
There's some feedback, Jason.
Is that mine?
It's better now.
Give me a sec. Maybe if I mute on this one. Does that work?
Yep, that's better.
Easy, cool. It was my second account. So like I was saying, these are the skills that are really important for junior lawyers to consciously develop in the first few years of the career. And as you get those repetitions in, they become more natural and carry you throughout the life of your career because they're going to be important whether you're a 1-year lawyer or a 10-year lawyer. So with that being said, we really wanted to share our experiences and a lot of, I guess, the lessons that we've had through the growing pains in the first few years of our careers. And hopefully these will be relevant to you and they'll help you anticipate some of the problems that you might face in the first few years of your careers. So with that being said, I'll dive right into matter management and then I'll hand over to Daniel for file and people management. With matter management, I guess the overarching idea of this is you've got a legal product that you're developing, right? Whether it's an advice or court case, whatever you're doing, contracts, court case, advice, whatever you're doing, but you want to make sure that the timelines, it's going to be delivered on time and it's going to be well resourced throughout your team, right? So anything that you can do as a junior lawyer to make it really easy for other people to work with you and make sure that you're delivering your tasks in a timely manner is going to be super, super important to your team. So some of the things that you might want to do in the first few years of your practice or, first few weeks of your practice is just get into a system of making sure that important deadlines are being locked into your calendars, right? So the first thing we want to talk about is calendar reminders. Make sure that all those important deadlines, whether it's court submissions, project dates, drafts that you need to hand into your supervisors, the timelines for these should be in your calendars so that you don't just slip. And also that helps you actually manage your time a bit better as a junior lawyer. When you have all of these key deadlines in, it makes the job for your supervisors a lot easier as well, because you can proactively go up to them and say, hey, by the way, in about a day, we've got this deadline coming up. Last I heard was I gave a draft on this matter yesterday, wondering if you had the time to look at it because we got to hand it in tomorrow, right? Oftentimes they'll also have an idea of the deadline, but it's really good impression to leave when you're the one driving those dates as well. When there's a second pair of eyes and they can count on you to also be reliable in that sense. So that's the first thing for calendar reminders, your really important deadlines for the work. The next thing is just a general point about teamwork in a legal environment, right? It's not just enough to have those deadlines in the calendars for when you need to give in work. You also need to keep your team aware of when you might not be available. So things like your absence dates, whether it's study leave, annual leave, whatever it is, those should also be in your calendar. And if it's an extended period of time, or there's important work coming up, you can also offer to shoot that into their calendars so that they're aware, right? So it's not suddenly like they start work on Monday and they're like, where is Jason? I need him for a matter. They can look in their calendar and see, oh, there's a blocked out week where he's going to take annual leave. I knew this from the beginning. It's in my calendar. It's reminding me, and there's no surprises, right? So it's just really good for effective teamwork. So that's the first point of matter management, just getting those calendar reminders in and making sure that you're hitting things on time and communicating effectively with your team. The next point I want to stress is really where you can add a fair bit of impact in meetings, right? So a lot of times where Daniel and I, when we were junior lawyers, or we still are, but very, very baby lawyers, right? A lot of times we go to meetings and we're just kind of like, well, what do we really do here besides maybe take some notes? Note taking is super important, but I just want to give a little bit of a structure to how you might approach it and some of the tips that we've learned. So with note taking, it's probably your core role in a lot of the early meetings that you go to in your careers. You'll go in, but it's really important to actually keep in mind a few of the things that you should be noting down, which might get overlooked. Really simple things like the date, the attendees, the time that you started the meeting, the time that you finished the meeting. Those are the basic things that you should be noting. You'll kind of have, if you're like me, right, you'll kind of be scrambling to almost just type anything you can in while you're listening to it. For the first few, years of my career, I was almost typing in a transcript of the meeting just because there were some concepts that I didn't understand. You will also get better at this in terms of understanding what key points are, but feel free to just type in a transcript if you don't quite understand things that are going on straight away. But if you're taking that sort of approach, the next thing is spending a little bit of time after the meeting to go through your notes and then write up a key points summary. So look at what you've written, write a key point summary, shove it right at the beginning. So the next time, whether it's a month, a year from now, you look back at your notes, at least you don't have to go through the entire process of reading a whole transcript or reading a bit of jumble. You can see exactly the few points that you've digested, and it also helps you understand what's going on in the meeting. That being said, it's also super helpful to have those key notes, and then anything you don't understand, you can go back to your supervisor or someone else who was in the meeting with you to just query them about, right? That's really specific feedback you can get, and it's really helpful for learning that you do. The other thing is just making sure that you do have file notes. You do have some record of the conversations that you're having, of the instructions that you're taking. It's really where I found that I slipped up was having the idea that file notes needed to be super formal, needed to be perfectly typed, blah blah blah, and then that's kind of I spent a lot of time trying to do that, and also some things just kind of fell through the cracks in terms of short phone calls where it made more sense just to go on with the task, right? I want to kind of break that idea and just I think the priority is to make sure there is a record, whether it's a perfectly drafted file note or if it's a quick email, or even just something that you quickly type into a notes document. Make sure there's some record of the things that you're being told so that you can always refer back to it in future. It's always better to have some sort of record, even if it's not perfect, than to have no record thinking you'll waste too much time typing it in. The other thing in terms of the next step that you can take with meetings and show that you're really proactive is not just going to the meetings and taking a note, but also offering to circulate action lists after meeting as well. And what these are is essentially, you've got your key point summary, you look through it, everyone's got some sort of action assigned to their name, this contract needs to be sent to this person by this time, blah, blah, blah. You've got that record. So you can offer to your supervisor and say, hey, by the way, do you want me to just draft a quick action list and I'll send it around to everyone? That's always super helpful, and it helps keep track of the progress that you guys are making over time as well for long-term matters. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in terms of what you do in meetings. And then another thing that you might not want to, or you probably shouldn't overlook, is just that initial prep for the meeting as well, right? So when you're invited to a meeting, it's always good to, again, get it in your calendar. Make sure that you know how much time you need to actually go to the place that you're meeting, or dial in. Make sure all of the dial-in details are right. Make sure that everyone can access the meeting. And then the other thing is just make sure that you have all of the documents that are required for the meeting. Especially as a junior, it's super proactive, reliable, blah blah blah, for you to be the one to say, hey, by the way, it looks like we'll need copies of XYZ. Do you want me to prepare hard copies, or have you got them, or do you want me to flick with all the virtual meetings these days? Do you want me to flick you all the relevant documents in one email? And just by doing this, helping out with that meeting prep, making sure that the dial-in details are correct, making sure you've got enough time to prepare and also go into the meeting. That's all the things that you can take on. Those are the responsibilities that you can take onto yourself and leave a really good impression with the people you're working with. The next point is about time recordings. And this is more relevant to, obviously, if you're private practice compared to in-house. So I won't dwell on this too much, but really it's going to be a big part of your practice as what you need to do as a junior lawyer. And some of the biggest tips that I have for this is, make sure that there's two parts to this. Make sure that you get your time in, and then make sure that your time entries have the right narratives. For the right narratives, I found it really helpful to actually ask whether it's a legal secretary or your partner or a supervisor or someone to take a look at a bill that's been sent out for examples of narratives. And what I mean by narratives is just a really clear, concise summary of what you did for those times, right? So you put yourself in the shoes of someone paying the bill and say, okay, if I spent 4 hours, am I paying 4 hours for what am I going to be happy paying for, right? If you have something that just says 4 hours amending contract, you'll kind of be like, yeah, that doesn't seem like value to me. Whereas if you have something that says 4 hours amending contract to reflect whatever instructions received on blah, then at least that gives a bit more of an idea of what the value that you're providing is, and they're a lot happier to, I guess, pay for things that they can understand where you put your time in for. Essentially, don't overlook the narratives part, because that's going to be your voice. That's one of the ways that you can directly talk to your client, or you do directly talk to your client, right? Because you're writing things that you've done, and they're going to ultimately be reading it. So make sure that those narratives are correct, and make sure those narratives are value for money, because that's ultimately the things that they're going to be paying for. And what's kind of scary is it goes into cost assessment, right? So there might be a point where there's cost assessors and they ask about all of these time entries that you've written in court and see whether that was fair value for money. So just don't overlook that part of the job. And then just a quick note about getting your time in, other than just saying get your time in. Make sure that you have a system that works for you. I personally use timers. So that helps me switch between different tasks that I get handed in or have to prioritize during the day. You might just prefer to write time down on the piece of paper and then enter it in at the end of the day. Whatever system works for you, just make sure you have one. And then, like the last point, it's easier to submit time early than late, or else, there's times when I look back, I don't remember what I did a week ago, right? I don't, let alone how much time I spent on things that I've worked on a week ago. So, having it fresh in your mind, being able to enter it in, that's actually going to save a lot more time in the long term than if you kind of try to batch it and take a later term approach. And I guess the last quick point that I want to make about matter management is just make sure that, for bonus points, you can always get an idea of the fee estimates and the time that you should be spending to actually track against, how much time you spent, right? So what I mean by this is, if you, from the outset of being instructed to help on a matter, ask your supervisor, hey, by the way, what's the budget for this job? Or how much time do you think I should be spending on this? That way, you kind of know, if you've gone over budget, or if you're going to approach budget, or if you spent way more time than you probably they estimated for you, you can provide an update. You can tell them, hey, by the way, I think that we're going to hit budget for this. So do you think we should advise the clients that, we might need an update to that? Those are really not strictly your job, but it's just good to keep in mind, especially as you advance in your careers. So hopefully, that all kind of made sense from a matter management point of view. I might hand over to Daniel now for file management tips.
Great, thanks, Jason. 3 things to add to that. Very good points about logging your hours in while it's fresh, because not only will you forget what you did, but you may lose hours. Sometimes I look back and I probably lost at least 10 hours. It accumulates because a few hours here on the weekend, and that's 10 hours of billables that you can't claim again because it's too late, it's been invoiced and whatnot. So that's really important. Number 2 is, I think it's good to keep budget. I think it's definitely bonus points to say, update on budget and whatnot if we're going to approach budget. But when you're a junior lawyer, don't feel like you need to be within the constraints of the time, because you're a junior, you're learning, right? What takes Jason 5 hours to review a document may take you 8, 9 hours, right? Doesn't mean you're bad, it just means you're new. So I wouldn't, like at the early stage, it's good to update, but also understand that you're learning as well. So not too much pressure on the budget there. And thirdly, in regards to narratives, now that I'm in-house, I actually see quite clearly the difference between good narratives and bad narratives.
Yeah.
And actually the narrative skill is transferable to in-house. You don't go as much detail, but especially at the bank, we do kind of bilateral meetings every 2 weeks with your direct report. And you still have to list out the matters that you're doing in relevant detail that they can understand without actually diving deep into the file. So transferable skills from private to in-house, which is actually quite good, because these topics I thought are quite nuanced and specific to private practice, but apparently they're not. So, right. So I'm going to, yeah, thanks. Let me share my screen here. Just a short presentation on file management, which is not the coolest topic, I have to admit. So before I jump into file management, I want to preface with the fact that file management is very personal, and that it's personal to you, personal to the people that you work for or that manage you, and it's personal to the firm or the company that you work for. Each company, each senior partner, each senior associate has their own style, has their own format. So, these are all suggestions that we're making, but definitely try to ask your supervisor, how do they like to name their files? Ask your firm if there's a firm convention, naming convention, and this and that. Because there's no point in you joining a firm, joining a company, and coming up with your own conventions that no one follows, that no one understands. And that's just going to create more havoc for those that you're trying to support. Right. So, as I said, this is very nuanced, specific kind of advice, and this is all kind of based on our experience through our junior years. But emails, that's going to be the bane of your existence. Outlook, just managing your inbox every day, because you wake up in the morning with hundreds of emails. Some are relevant, most are irrelevant. So how do you filter, right? If you don't create any filters, you're basically spending at least an hour in the morning filtering out your emails, which is fine, but you end up waking up way earlier just to do that, so you don't cut into your billable time. So I used to wake up around 7:30, 8 o'clock just to get through emails. By 9 o'clock, I'm ready to go. But I could have used that time to sleep or do something else. So how we kind of manage our inbox now is to create Outlook rules. So it's very simple. You kind of just right-click on the email that you want to create a rule on. Sorry if some of you know this already, but I'm just going to go through it one more time. And then you can basically create a rule. So anytime you get an email from ABC Corp, you can filter it to go into a specific folder, ABC Corp folder, right? So you kind of right-click, create a rule. You can choose always move messages from so-and-so. And then you can basically insert a subject, so meeting notes or newsletters, and then kind of move these into a specific folder. So that way it doesn't clutter up your inbox. And sometimes you have kind of daily news alerts that are useful when you have the time to read it. So these are the things you will kind of filter out. Be careful when you enter subjects. So if you enter subject like client onboarding, because perhaps your firm sends out weekly onboarding matters that you filter out the clients. But you may have an email from a client that subject line client onboarding as well, and it might get lost in that clutter. And then you end up missing it, and then, so be careful what you're naming these subjects. I would keep it generally broad, but also check all your inboxes as well. Also, I would refrain from creating a rule for specific people to send to inboxes, because you may be on multiple matters with someone. So it's not helpful if you do that. Yeah, so this is basically to show you that you can create multiple folders in your inbox to basically filter these rules into. I often have, when I was in private practice, a folder for each client. And within each client, there could be a matter within each client. So once again, ABC Corp. And then one matter is basically updating registers, right? And then another matter could be transaction documents or transaction to purchase whatever. So I would keep these separate because, one, you're able to understand what you've done for this client in the past. And two is, if later on you do something similar for another client, you're like, oh, where did I get those emails from? Where did I get those documents from? You can always search, yes, okay, ABC Corp, I did register of updating registers previously. So I can search this file for relevant documents, relevant advice. Right, so this is just more about where you can find your rules that you created. If you need to amend it, you can click on rules on top and then manage rules and alerts. Generally, when you create a rule though, and it works, you kind of just leave it, but you can always kind of amend it this way. And so with document programs like iManage that help you organize and centralize all your documents, I understand that actually now being in-house, that this is not applied throughout. I know that UBS were just implementing iManage now, whereas law firms have had it for years. So with iManage, it's a centralized database for documents where you can kind of load your documents on an up version, certain documents, so you're sure that you're constantly working on the most updated one. Also, with iManage, it's very useful because you can see what documents have been seen by others, when they've seen it, when they've edited it. So it's helpful when you need to send it to multiple teams and they need to opine. So you can always kind of check, instead of emailing, hey, did you comment on this document yet? You can actually go in to the document and see, okay, Richard has opined, so I don't need to follow up with him. I can go ahead and process this. So often you need to link your Outlook inbox folder with the iManage emails folder, because that's where you store your emails. And this is important because many times you may be getting emails that the partner is not CC'd on, or the senior associate is not CC'd on, although they should be. So if you don't save it into the emails, they're unable to find that email. And so they don't know that you're having these kind of side conversations with the client or whatnot. So it's always good to update the emails to make sure it files so that they're aware, listen, I'm doing this on the side as well. You're not CC'd. You can take a look at the emails here. But also there are many times where the partner is saying, oh, Daniel, I need you to dig into the emails because last year we did something for this client on this matter. I need you to find that email. Those are vague instructions, but you will get those vague instructions. And it's on you to be a good kind of Sherlock Holmes and dig through these iManage folders and find it, know what keywords to search for. And that just becomes part and parcel of being a junior lawyer, right? So that's very important, once again, to file your emails, because if you don't file your emails, the other associates that come on can't find your emails then. And that just creates havoc within the team.
Yeah, can I just add one thing, Daniel, for
Yep.
this one? It's a little mundane, but super important. When you get an email, don't just file it in. If there's an attachment, please save that separately in the right document folder. So, you know, for me, I would get emails attaching draft contracts, right? If I just file the email, don't separately save the attachment, we're losing valuable information that kind of wastes a lot of time in the end when I have to go back through a week or 2 weeks of emails to try to figure out exactly what had been sent. So, you know, taking that proactive approach and filing both emails and attachments separately is just, you know, it's going to save you or save me a lot of time in the end.
Yep, exactly that point. So once again, it would depend on the system that you've kind of developed with your firm, with your partners. Sometimes legal assistants will help you with that, and that's only if they're told to. And there's once again the system, but many times as a junior, you become the kind of project manager. So you need to make sure all the files are saved appropriately. But in terms of saving appropriately, that means with iManage, saving the right versions. If you have an SPA already, it makes no sense to save another SPA if it's the same document, only because it makes it easier for others to understand, okay, we're on version 5 of this document, versus there are 5 documents here, all SPAs. Which one is the most relevant one? Which one are we using? So that's a unique function of iManage, that you can actually save up versions. Another thing about versions is if you're trying to delete a version, do not yourself try to drag and drop into the delete box, because that will actually drag the entire thread of documents and delete the entire thread. And sometimes after that, it's permanent. I've had bad experience with that. I've learned. But how you save yourself, so first off, if you want to delete that version, email IT, and IT can delete a specific version. But to kind of counteract that, whenever you send emails, send both the link, the iManage link, and the actual document to whoever is going to review your work. Because in case the thread is deleted from iManage, you have a soft copy that you can always start again, and you can kind of collect it through your emails. So that's one way to counteract it.
Yeah, for those not familiar with iManage yet, the link is essentially the editable version of that document. And what Daniel's saying is also attach a read-only version, so that if someone goes into that link and makes some edits that they didn't mean to, at least you always have another version that you can refer back to as a backup.
Yep. And also that's actually quite useful if you say can't access your work at your work desktop, you need to send it to your personal email. You can't access iManage sometimes with your personal email unless you're doing Citrix, but that's just another benefit of attaching a soft copy. So a bit more nuanced again, once again with iManage, how you organize your folders depends on how your firm does it, but generally for the firms I've worked for, you kind of list it based on documents that you received, and each matter is already based on your client and a specific client matter. So it's different from how I was saying you would manage your inbox. But within documents, say it's a transaction, you can create a subfolder for due diligence documents that you're saving, draft documents, execution documents, and executed documents later on. This is helpful for when a lawyer comes up to you and says, oh, yeah, I need to see the execution documents. Can you send it to me? Or if there are other deals that have similar kind of documents, you can always dig into what the final version was you used in that deal. fee estimates and invoices are a part of matter administration and actually very important to save as well, because once again, you'll be asked from time to time to pull up fee estimates for a deal to make sure, like Jason was talking about, if you have gone over budget or if you're under budget and you need to update the client or update the partner that you're working for. And on the right, you can see where I highlighted version. That's what I was talking about in terms of creating an up version of a certain document that you have. And that's helpful because you're able to see which current document you're working on, but also when you run black lines, compare certain documents. Sometimes partners will say, last week's document, can you compare that to the one we received today? Now, if you've renamed your document accurately, so received on certain days, and you kind of list in that way, you can say, okay, I'm comparing version 5 to version 10. And that way you give accurate black lines. I know when I was a junior, I struggled with black lines because I didn't understand the version process, but also I didn't understand how to name my documents, so I don't have to keep digging into my emails to say, was this a April 10 one or April 15 one? So these are all kind of things that you'll pick up along the way.
Yeah, and sorry, just one point, Daniel. So this is obviously something that we can share in terms of iManage specifically, but I think just taking a step back, right? You kind of really appreciate the value of just keeping files up to date after you've been handed a matter that has not been like managed properly. So imagine someone is going on vacation for a month and gives you their file on a matter that's been going on for 6 months, where they haven't properly saved all of the emails, they haven't properly saved all the documents coming in, you don't have file notes on things that have happened during the transaction, and then while they're gone, the partner or someone says, hey, by the way, can you dig up something from blah, 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 that's when you really, firstly, get angry at that person, but secondly, just really appreciate the value of having a well-organized file and having these file management basics kind of guiding you in the way that you approach things.
Completely agree. And actually, funny story is that I was previously on a file handed over to me from another associate. And remember I said, naming conventions and whatnot, try to copy the firm, copy the associates or other partners. This associate didn't copy anyone. They did their own. So what they did, instead of listing out documents, matter administration, and then kind of broader categories here, they saved their files based on date. So you got a June 29, and then you got a July 1st. It may seem logical in your head to do date because, oh, I received these documents on a certain date. But then when you're digging into each of these dated folders, you have a share purchase agreement for each of them. But even though they're dated that way, you may have been working on another document within an older folder. So it's not helpful for others when you hand over, when you kind of name it in this way that no one understands and only you understand. So thanks for reminding me of that, Jason.
It's a hard lesson that I learned.
It is, and then you don't want to impose this on others, so you try to keep with good convention, I guess. And lastly, this is more of a kind of document naming convention thing. Once again, depending on how you guys do it, how your firm does it, these are all just suggestions. But generally for me, I like to put the document name down, so director resolutions or an SPA, and then you talk about the action that you're doing, whether approval of an ESOP or a certain project that you're on. And then you may want to include the law firm that you received it from, or if you're the one sending it out, your law firm sending it out, and then the date. This helps just based on you understanding what the document is, what the document's trying to do, and who sent what and on what date. This becomes quite important actually when you, as I said, are tasked with going through iManage or going through your Outlook inbox to find an email, an archived email. So if you understand how you name your folders, so if you understand that approval of ESOP is usually how you name it, you can always search approval of ESOP and you'll find a list of documents with this kind of title. Just makes it easier for you and for everyone around you that are looking for similar documents. And lastly, sometimes you see emails which have been replied or forwarded many times, and you get something like this. take it upon yourself just to clean it up, because inevitably this takes away from valuable kind of space in reading the topic, reading the subject line, and it's just more professional in that sense. As I said, as a junior lawyer, you're becoming the project manager. So making sure things are concise and clear is part of your remit. So this is one small example of what you can do to kind of make it easier for everyone within the deal or the case. Right, so I'm going to shoot this back over to Jason on people management.
Just before you go, Jason, the chat box iManage is new to most people. I believe it's a software program that's mainly used in large national and international firms, and now probably in some in-house teams as well, where they have large ones. Here in Canada, a lot of people typically use Clio.
Right.
You'll find Clio, it's just an alternative software system, but it's something that for any of you here in Canada are looking at different types of software. Look on Clio's website, they have loads and loads of guides on how you can use it. The email point that Daniel made is super important because it will actually file your emails automatically for you because it will recognize what's in the title. So unless you sort of clean up the subject, it's going to end up all over the place and you're not going to be able to find things. So definitely keep on top of that and change it if needs be so that it sorts properly for you.
Yeah, and I can also add, for those that are in-house or for firms that don't have a document management system, the conventions that we're mentioning actually are helpful as well, because instead of renaming your folders within iManage and upversioning, you can create this locally on a local drive. So your base document is documented, dated whatever date. You save the second document and you can do your own version. You can type in version 2, version 3, version 4. It's a more manual process and it's more accessible only on your local drive, but that's how you create your own data management system locally.
Yeah, and I guess just to stress on that point, yes, iManage is very specific, probably not used much in Canada or smaller law firms, but it's just a tool. And the way that we want to kind of address this presentation is, these are the ways that you can do it on that system, but really take away the fundamentals, right? Like make sure that your files are up to date. Make sure that you keep track of which version of which document at which time, right? And make sure that you don't, basically lose track of everything that's going on, and have that discipline to go back and make sure things are saved properly. It's really kind of basic, but again, that's our job as junior lawyers. And these are the things that kind of carry you throughout your career. The best thing that happens when you're doing this properly is no one notices. The worst thing that happens is when you don't do this properly and everyone notices and they're just like, wow, that's created so much more work for everyone than it needed to be. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful moving away from just the iManage context. Cool. So I guess just a little bit on people management, which really should just be called working with your team. So just an understanding of who you're going to be working with as a junior lawyer coming into a law firm or starting out your career, right? The first person who's probably the most helpful in a law firm or any in-house role is your assistant or your secretary. Get an idea that, firstly, very, very important, they don't work for you, right? You guys work as a team. So get an understanding of what sort of tasks that they do for other people in your team, where they can help you, and also how you can support them, how you can do your work to make it really easy for them to do theirs. That's probably the main point for working with your secretary, right? You're working together as a team, but also just kind of understanding that depending on how they work, you kind of, those are the resources and the help that you have for what you're doing. So try to allocate or delegate to them as much as you can within what they do, whether that's helping you out with file management, for example, organizing emails with those attached files, saving those attachments to the file. If that's what they do, then make sure that that's in your head and you can assign that work to them so that you're not using up your time with it. Similarly, you know, if there's stuff that they don't do, don't just assume that you can just tell them that they need to do it from now on. You need to kind of take that approach, work flexibly with your team, and kind of understand what's on your shoulders, what's on theirs. The other thing is with partners and senior colleagues, which is where most junior lawyers are really concerned about, right? And some of this is really basic, but even now, and especially during COVID, I need reminders on these sorts of things. And these are, you know, on the surface, really basic, right? Like, be responsive on emails, acknowledge receipt of emails and tasks. And, you know, for example, where I've kind of slipped up during COVID is if I was working with someone physically in an office and they send me a task, I can kind of just walk over there and be like, hey, yeah, that's fine, I'm onto it. Or, you know, I'm actually doing something else for someone else, but I can fit it in and get you it within the timeline that you need it. You kind of lose that when you're all working remotely. So it's really helpful to, when you get a task, just respond with an email, acknowledge that you've received it and say, hey, I'm actually, you know, I'm able to get on it now, or I actually have this other task for this other person, but I'm happy to reprioritize if you guys talk to each other and tell me which one I should work with, or, you know, I'm busy with someone else, but I can start this at this time and still meet your deadline, right? It's just that communication and that acknowledgement that's super important. I guess the other thing is for senior colleagues and anyone else that you're really working with, try not to be too reactive. You can always sit by yourself and just wait for work to come in. And you can make a career out of that, right? But what really goes a long way and makes you look really good is always just checking in on if you have free time to help out. Or if it's getting towards the end of the day and you just check in with them and say, hey, by the way, do you need help with anything else before I go? Or, you know, is there something that's you'd like my help with tomorrow? Just helping with that planning, and also just being able to check in with them, communicate when you do have time. That's always super appreciated, and it's really look proactive. And now that I'm in a position where I'm delegating a little bit more, I can just see the massive differences between people who do that and who don't. And often the people who do that, I'm the one who's, you know, anytime a task comes in, I think about them first. And that's how I open up opportunities for myself, but also how, you know, now that I'm giving some opportunities, seeing how that all flows through. So hopefully that's all helpful. Basically, that's all I want to talk about in terms of people management. Daniel, did you have any other points?
Nope.
Sweet. Cool. So I think that kind of concludes overarching material that we want to cover. Hopefully that was helpful, but we might just open this up for questions. And I think Siobhan helpfully sent through some questions earlier, but I guess one that kept popping up is whether this was transferable between different law firms or between different jurisdictions, internationally or otherwise. I think from the material you can kind of tell, yes, it is super helpful. Just communicating, managing documents properly, following up with people, making sure that time deadlines, blah, 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 they're all met. That's always going to be appreciated in law, in different countries, in any profession, really. So hopefully you can just transfer it all through. And yeah, otherwise open up the floor to questions. Yeah.
Sure. I'll kick it off with a question we got online beforehand. So we got another one as well, which was, how do you demonstrate to a firm that you have good file management skills, for example? Do you guys have any tips of how you've done that? I mean, I know you've both moved law firms into different companies. Has it ever come up in a question?
Yeah, I think it has. Sorry,
Yeah.
I saw you shaking your head, Daniel. But for me, right? It's not one of those things that. Okay, so I want to kind of break it down. If it's in an interview context, That's going to be different to, obviously working with people context, right? In a working with people context, they don't ask you on the first day of your job, are you good with managing files? It's kind of learned over time whether you're good at it or not. But something that goes a long way, and what Daniel was talking about, was being really adaptable and flexible with the way that you do manage files. So if I have a new starter, or if I'm a new starter in the team, right, coming into a matter that's already has the history and already documents have been saved a certain way, even if that's not the best way, you go in and you take on the way that they've been saving it and the system that's been working for them, and name your future files according to that. That's just a really basic step that's super helpful for file management skills, right? Demonstrating file management skills. It's a really sharp contrast when you bring someone into a matter, and a week later you look through your file and suddenly there's all these different names popping up, all these different documents that haven't been there before, and you're just like, well, why is that, right? There's a bit of give and take where you can get better. You can kind of teach each other to be better and change styles. But in the outset, if you're starting out, just seriously look through the file first and adapt to that.
Yeah, that's not an area that you want to shine right away. Shine in terms of getting attention and spotlight. Blending in is best. But obviously, if you see areas for improvement, do it their way first, but also suggest afterwards, hey, I think that doing this way might be useful. Up to you guys, but just an observation.
Absolutely. We have a question from Ivy. Did I pronounce that right? Oh, thank goodness.
So do I go ahead? Oh yeah, my question is that how often is appropriate to schedule a call with the senior lawyers to chat on your progress and development?
Great question. Who wants to kick that one off, gentlemen?
Without being too eager and without being too...
No, you should be eager. I think you should be as eager as you want to be. I think you should schedule a chat almost after every major task where you're learning something. I think it's good to have sort of regular feedback sessions, right? So whatever kind of works, whether it's fortnightly or monthly. You can always just suggest that. If they're too busy, they'll let you know. But otherwise, if I have a new task where I'm learning something, or I feel like I didn't do things quite as good as I could have, I always just say at the end, hey, by the way, I feel like I didn't do these few things as good as I could have. Could we have a chat about that? That's just, making sure it's super timely, making sure it's super specific, and you're always kind of reaching a point where, for your 6 monthly or yearly reviews, there's no surprises, right? Everyone kind of knows what's going on. So the more often the better, I think, depending on, their timelines. They'll let you know if they're too busy.
Yeah. Typically for me, I think I schedule more frequent chats with a senior associate because I think they're more kind of like ears to the ground, whereas partners may be passive sometimes in their involvement. It depends completely if they're involved heavily or not. But I feel like senior associates are more willing to help. People like Jason that are more willing to chat and mentor and whatnot. Not saying partners are not, but they are probably spending their time to mentor people like Jason, the senior associates trying to make up to counsel and partner, right? So I think feedback is great, and feedback's more constant is better as well, but depends on who you're getting it from and who you're working more closely with, I think.
I would also add in that if you're being given a task for the first time, you're very in your right, and you should be doing this, to ask them, one, when do they need the answer by? So when do they need the job back? And two, if I get to X number of hours and I haven't got anything, can I come back and talk to you? And I think if you're very upfront at the beginning and you ask them this, people are much more willing when you knock on the door to say, are you spinning your wheels? And you can be like, well, I found this and I found this, but I can't find this. They're like, come in, let's sit down, let's go through it. And they'll stop what they're doing. So they're a bit more approachable about it. So definitely take the initiative, like Jason was saying earlier, and ask them when is a good time to come back and check. Because then you've almost set it up in their schedule. And don't wait until really close to the deadline do it earlier so you've still got time to go away and polish it and make it the finished product you want to hand over.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. Jawad has like a whole list of questions for us right now. So Jawad, go with one, and then we might intersperse somebody else in between your questions.
Right. So my first question is, how much training do law firms give to incoming students or associates or members? And how much training is there in the job?
Around software, he means.
Around software, right?
Not only around software, around file management and around basically the processes that are in place in a firm or in an in-house team.
Yeah, okay. I think in terms of a formal program where you come in and they tell you, you know, you're going to spend 2 hours learning this, really depends on the firm. I personally, even working at a large national firm, didn't have that. I had it through trial by fire. They shove you in and you kind of have to figure things out. And that's why I had, you know, severe growing pains just by learning what was wrong and fixing accordingly. But what I think is super helpful is, again, taking that proactive approach. You know, you join a team, and if you're worried about, or if you just want to check about how they manage their files, make a time with a secretary, or make a time with someone who's like a year or two above you, and just say, hey, by the way, I just want to make it as easy as possible to work with you guys. So do you mind just giving me a rundown on how you save documents, what sort of things you save into files, how you name files, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, no one's going to say, no, I don't want to teach you how to do that. I'd rather you just go off and make mistakes. It's just, they just don't think of that straight away because it's so natural in the job that they do.
I would say for Canadian national firms, articled at Dentons, they had a more structured approach. So I think the first month or so, they had kind of inductions on LexisNexis, legal research, but also iManage and firm conventions. But that may be just restricted to kind of national firms. At the end of the day, all the kind of trainees still relied on each other. And like Jason was saying, trial by fire, we had to learn from each other because all the advice was great, but if it's not applied, it means nothing. So I think all of us will be in the same boat, whether or not you get this kind of structure or not.
Yeah, my experience with national firms and boutique firms. National firms, yes, I had a full month of onboarding with all of the training, and then I started working and nobody followed the rules. So if you have the training, it doesn't mean they actually follow it because they're human beings and user error with everything. And then I've gone to boutique firms and in-house positions and various other places that I've worked. And one place gave me a massive guide and went, they're the rules. And I was like, okay, all right, try and read this book and figure it out. And then other people have gone, go and speak to Sarah over there if you have a question. She'll tell you everything you need to know. So, I mean, it really does depend on each individual situation. And because all the different systems they use have their own nuances and differences, it changes wherever you go on that one.
Yeah, Jawad, I think training sounds really good, but you know, I come into a team and there's a partner who's been there for 40 years and he's been doing things a certain way for 40 years, surviving like 6 mergers of the law firms and different types of training that they've done. It doesn't matter to him. And like, if you're going into that sort of team, that training might not help you. So again, just try to be flexible and hopefully that helps.
I don't see anyone else's hand up. So Jawad, did you want to ask your next question?
Before he asks that, can I just quickly ask something that's related to what has just been said? So you're saying that it's unlikely that someone will just tell you, no, I can't help you, or I'm not going to show you how this works or whatever. But if you are faced with a situation where somebody is too busy to show you, or they show you something that they may have shown you incorrectly or something like that, how do you then go about sort of trying to integrate yourself into that that team and still familiarize yourself with everything as quickly as possible?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I I always think just take a step back and take a little bit more time in the beginning to look at what's already been done, even if they're not perfectly training you or showing you things how, like, the correct way, right? If you're looking at a matter, you can kind of figure it out in terms of, you know, how documents are saved, how things, you know, whether calendar invites and blah 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 have been sent. But don't just rely on one person being that source of knowledge. I guess you'll find most times you get lucky and you ask someone a question and they'll give you a really good work through. But I think I realized early on, not all good lawyers are good managers or good teachers. And having that variety, if you're being blockaded, I guess, from someone just saying, oh, look, I have no interest in teaching you, and there are people like that, feel free to walk to the next person who might have an interest, and just get that get that variety of input from the team members with you.
I'd also add, if there's maybe one person in the firm, unlikely, but if there's only that one person that can help you and they're uncooperative, always approach it with the mentality of you trying to be helpful. And that the way you phrase it is that, like, hey, listen, I just want to clarify here, what you taught me here, is this the right way, or how should I do this? I'm just trying to be helpful to you and to the team. And if the faster I know this, the better it is for everyone, kind of thing. So kind of coach it in that kind of mindset. And it's really hard to not help someone after that. There still might be people that do that, but I don't know.
There might be people, but
yeah,
at that point, that's not your fault anymore. That's
an office politics thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I interject just for a sec? I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of finding your allies, and that's part of integrating into the organization. If it is a slightly bigger firm, there's going to be some people that you pretty quickly realize, this person's never going to really be able to help me because they just don't get it. And there's going to be other people where, you kind of, you help them, they help you, and you kind of form an alliance kind of thing.
Great point.
Yep.
Very good points. Jawad, do you want to ask your next question? And anyone else, if you have a question, please, throw it in the chat box so that we know you have a question.
So if I'm thinking about applying to a firm or an in-house position, will it help my application better if I get some basic training in some of the basic software or systems that are in place from places like Khan Academy or Udemy or any other certification courses, perhaps from even the makers of the softwares?
Yeah, for software specifically, it won't hurt you to learn about it, but the law firms, as opposed to file management training, right, they do give really good software training upfront. I spend like half a day every time I join where they just teach me how to use the systems that they have in place. Now, again, that's just them teaching you the functions and the features of the tools that they have. It doesn't teach you, how people like to, use it. So that's something that you'll figure out yourself. And that was the focus of what we were trying to say. But in terms of, how to use iManage and what it can do, they'll be pretty good on that. So don't worry too much about that. But again, if you want to get a bit of a heads up, and you can find those courses online for free or whatever, go for it.
I would say with that though, if you're going to go into something like real estate, and they, in real estate, typically they use a particular package, especially in Ontario, which you have to use to upload all the documents to get it to the registry. If you can find a course to do that and you want to work in real estate, do that course, because that's normally one of the criteria in their job postings, is you need to have familiarity with that software. Now, they're not expecting you to be proficient in it, but they do want you to be able to sort of navigate around parts of it. I believe for litigators, there is also some various software packages that litigators use. You may need to get familiar with those as well. You have two corporate lawyers and a construction lawyer here, so we don't necessarily use all of the same systems across the board, but I think in terms of everything else Jason has said is 100% correct on that one. Anybody else have any questions, any thoughts, Any experiences from your travels and your experiences elsewhere in other jurisdictions? I know for us as a firm, we use naming conventions a lot, and we have just changed our naming convention, which is so much fun. But we've actually put the date at the beginning of documents rather than at the end of documents, because that way you can sort by date order. But we do also use version numbers at the end, and version numbers are incredibly important. And then after the version number, we then put who wrote the document. So whether it's one of us internally or it's an external person, so that you can track where they come from, because we do have different versions in the system, but no one's worked out how to use it, so we just still save them. It's a new feature that we got that no one's figured out really at the moment. And naming conventions are super important, so adopt one, whatever it is, and then make little tiny tweaks as you go to improve the naming conventions and make it logical. Like, don't call it some cryptic name for a document, call it what it is. You know, if it's a notice of claim, call it a notice of claim, so that when you search in the system, you can find the notice of claim. Lots of people like to abbreviate, but then you don't know what the abbreviations mean when that person leaves.
Yeah, just another probably mundane point, but shows how sexy law really is. If you, like Siobhan was saying, like if you save a document, make sure it makes sense, right? But also if you're saving things like emails or file notes, literally writing a little bit of a description about what that is, you know, email from X to Y, re whatever they're talking about, that's going to save you a lot of time when you get that scenario where your supervisor says, hey, by the way, did we ever talk about this? And you have to look through all the emails, and if they're all saved, email from X to Y, email from X to Y, email from X to Y, that's just not going to be a good time for you. You're going to have to click through every single one of them.
I would also add, sometimes you're on an email thread that's literally 1 million pages long, because there are multiple transactions on that thread. Some people don't create a new thread for some reason. Change the title,
change the name, man.
change the name, because otherwise they all belong to the same transaction and it all gets lost. Little things to help you save time.
I think with the with COVID situation, our initially what we used to do back in our firm, is that we used to when we work on a document internally, we used to email each other a lot. But with the COVID situation coming in, it was no longer possible to, you know, usually what happened was I'm an associate at a law firm. I used to do the basic drafting. I used to take it up to the senior associate. Senior associate which used to give his these are all being done physically. So we used to do this, take this draft to a senior associate. He would give his input, and we would take this draft together with the partner, and he would sign it off. That's what happened. But with the COVID situation coming in, we now use Google Documents, for example. So we can actually track live what the other person is doing. So all three of us working on a document at the same time. So I think Google Documents is also, I think, is an upcoming thing when you can see live what your draft, how your draft is being improved at every level. So that is something we have now adopted. But I've never heard of iManage. I mean, thank you for that. Never heard of iManage. I'll just explore a little bit more about that.
But uploading documents to Google servers in the form of Google Documents, or even in the form of attachments to emails, I think it raises certain privacy concerns, because you are essentially disclosing the information contained in your attachments to Google, which is a third-party entity, right? Or is that not something that is heated here?
No, it is a question that comes up regularly. It is a question. It's something that is being debated by the law societies. There is no definitive, as far as I'm aware anyway, there's no definitive rule on what that is, because it is a tool that people are using, and there are user licenses and user rules and regulations in place when you sign on for it. But it is a question that people have asked, and that's why certain document management systems, such as iManage, such as Clio, have set up their own version of doing that so that it's within the program, but you still have the same privacy.
It's also a third party.
It's also a third party, and there's all sorts of questions around where the documents are stored. So even if you're using a cloud system, so Clio is a cloud-based system. I think iManage, from what you were talking about before, guys, is Citrix-based for many of you if you're out of the office. So Citrix is where you dial in to your computer in the office effectively. So you kind of make a virtual desktop on your computer. So there's all sorts of requirements around that, and it's definitely a hot topic with privacy and the new global privacy rules that are being discussed at the moment. Sometimes you'll see me post about them on social media because it's kind of intriguing for me on the privacy issue. But definitely something to be aware of if you're setting up your own practice. Read all the rules, read all the fine print, know what you're getting into, know where it's being stored, which country it's being stored in, because that jurisdiction might have an impact on what it's doing.
I've actually had an issue with this when I worked with jurisdictions outside of Bangladesh, which is where I'm from. Firms like, I've worked with firms like Cleary, Gottlieb, and KNL Gates. They flag these things out particularly, and they are very particular about these things. But the point about working with a software like Clio, even though they are hosted in the cloud, the agreements that you have with Clio, as opposed to with Google, affords you certain privacies that Google doesn't. So those are tailor-made agreements for law firms, and they are really sensitive about privacy concerns and everything else.
Maybe we need to get a privacy lawyer to come on and talk about this for us, and a tech lawyer, because I can see this being a good topic for everybody on here, on this one. So I'm super conscious. It's getting kind of late, especially for those of you on the East Coast, and for those of you on the West Coast, I'm sure you're all ready for dinner. And the guys in Upside Down World have to actually go and get on with the rest of their day. So we have time for, I think, one more question. If anybody has a burning question to ask, speak now or forever hold your peace. You can literally just unmute yourself and talk. If no one does, 3, 2, 1. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this week. Thank you for sharing all of your tips. This has been wonderful, super useful, refresh for me in particular, and hopefully a refresh for lots of the rest of you, and some ideas going forward to put into practice when you get back into the office or when you're next doing some work. Daniel and Jason both put their LinkedIn contacts in the chat. Please do connect with them. They're happy to answer your questions. They would also love a recommendation. I'd like one too if you want to send me a recommendation. I didn't know you could do that on LinkedIn, but you can. So yeah, send us some 5 stars or 4 stars, kind of like Uber. You can send us some stars. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your feedback. Let us know what you want to hear about in the future. Now I'm going to add privacy law to our list of future topics. Next week, we are going to be joined by another member of GLC's board. We're going to be joined by Sam from our Ontario chapter, and he is going to be talking about dispute law around real estate. Something to do with real estate, litigation, disputes, COVID. It's going to be a really, really hot button topic right now. It's definitely a very popular topic. It's a very intense area of the law, especially given COVID right now. So I hope you can join us next week. Until then, have a lovely rest of your week, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank
Bye.
you.